welcome back. I'm here with David Flin. Today, we're going to talk about an anthology put together regarding the Ukraine conflict. I'm going to let David explain all the mechanics, what it's called, how it came together, the full story. But welcome back, David. And why don't you just get us started and talk about the anthology?
Okay. Well, the anthology is called Building a Better Future, which we have a copy of there. It's an anthology that was put together by a group of writers, with all proceeds from this going to the Red Cross appeal for the reconstruction of Ukraine. It's the Ukraine appeal from DEC, Disasters Emergency Committee. That's what the book is. How it came into being, we have to cast our mind back all the way to early February, when the late February, when the invasion happened. And if one recalls, then there was a lot of media attention and concern over what was going on. I and a number of other writers on a historical forum were talking about this in terms of what on earth can we do to help? There must be something we as writers of historical fiction can do to help this. And we were stumped for a while. Eventually someone came up with the idea, we're historical writers, why don't we write a book, and the proceeds from the book going to the appeal. That was where the idea came along. It was fairly quickly worked out that however the war would turn out, and right back in late February, early March, things look very different to what they look now. It looked like it would all be over and done and dusted in a month, and the important part would be rebuilding Ukraine after whatever had happened.
And by the way, the consensus at the time was that not that Ukraine would repel the Russians. It would be that after the Russians had kind of achieved their objectives, then yes.
Yes. The general feeling was that weight of numbers, Russia would win, impose whatever settlement they chose to impose, and would then would be the process of rebuilding the place up. So the concept of working for reconstruction was foremost in our mind, hence the title Building a Better Future. If you're going to build something, you may as well build something that is better than what you currently have. You've got to do that. So we put together that concept. I run a book publishing company. It's mainly historical. Well, it's not mainly. It is historical fiction for children and young adults. But because I ran a book publishing company, and because previously, before I retired, I'd been involved in. I was an editor of trade press magazines, and I was used to working on tight deadlines. And the one thing that we felt was that this had to be produced in a hurry. Okay, we were innocent in those days. But yeah, it was this has got to be done very rapidly. So the idea came together, and I earned the decision was made, we will do this on March the 6th. On March the 23rd, the book was published. So 17 days, start to finish.
That's extremely fast.
It's ridiculous. Never again, or at least never again at that speed. I was in the fortunate position that I could basically drop all the other projects that I've been working on, concentrate on doing this. We got put out contacts to people and let them know what we were doing. Can you write a story for us on this theme to go in here? We ended up with 12 authors and 13 stories in the anthology. Some directly related to Ukraine, some a little more tangential, but all with the theme of building a better future.
Yeah, what's creepy about it is so one of the stories in it is mine, because I had written 2 stories about Russia, Ukraine long before any of this happened, which is a little odd that I would have things that specific in my repertoire. But tell us a little bit about the stories and kind of the variety that are in there, and the authors too.
Certainly. It starts off with a story called Firestarter by Matthew Cressall. I have no idea how the name is pronounced. I've only ever seen it written down. So if he's listening and I got it wrong, my apologies. And that will apply to a number of others. But Firestarter is essentially, it's taking the 1960s thing where the problem wasn't global warming, but global cooling and sort of ice age coming. And how do we prevent this? And it was a 1960s style solution, which was effectively sending a rocket to Jupiter to create another star in the system to add to the heat to prevent climate change, ice age, rather than global warming. And it's very 1960s SF type approach of doing it. And of course, the closing music on the piece is Holst's Jupiter from the Planet Suite. From there, Jupiter saves the Earth by brave Earth astronauts turning it into a sun, which was there, but preventing climate change, building a better future. The second story, Dennis Fike, his Ukrainian Canadian, and he wrote basically a historical piece about the Holodomor, explaining the starvation of Ukraine during the Soviet era there, and basically just giving the background of what happened, giving the background to how Ukraine came to have its first suffering in the modern era from that. A purely factual piece. Then we have Jared Kavanagh writing Assignation. This is an alternate history view set in World War II or post-World War II, where for reasons Adolf Hitler had been killed, and you were now in the police state, and the Nazi police were seeking out homosexuals, and this is a case of someone dealing with that situation. I'll not go into too many details about the hows and whys and what happens for reasons of spoilers, but it's a fascinating little hunter prey piece. Then we have a piece by a chap called David Flin. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I basically took building a better future. Well, a better future for some isn't necessarily a better future for all. I'm a great fan of the Sherlock Holmes stories, as is evident from the title. But one thing I have noticed is that they are very middle-class based. They are aimed for a middle-class audience. It's all about that level of society upwards, and yet he employs the Baker Street irregulars, who are ragamuffins from the East End of London. Now, I'm from the East End of London. I know this, and there are certain things that basically don't quite gel insofar as, you know, they're Baker Street irregulars from the Victorian era. They're East End gutter scum. They would have had rickets. They would have had short lifespans. They would have all the rest of it. And Holmes and Dr. Watson, a medical doctor, never remark on the rickets, the problems, or anything. They're just convenient players to come along, to give the information and to go off, and neither Holmes nor Watson show the slightest concern for the irregulars. And by now, this is set sort of right at the end of Holmes's career. He's now retired to Sussex, and the Baker Street irregulars are pissed off, and effectively they're planning on starting class warfare in order to get their just desserts. You know, they've been shat upon by society for all these years. They've had enough. They've seen it, and they know how to do this. And eventually, it closes with and we're going to start on the 28th of June, 1914, which, as readers, people who know their First World War would know, is the day that Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo. So it was left on there. But basically, it's the start of class warfare, one group trying to get a better future for themselves, which the upper classes aren't going to like. But we then move on to Charles Murphy, who's written a number of things. He's a great comics book fan. If there is anything about comics that he knows about it. This story is, again, it's an alternate history. It's set where the EU is becoming a federal state. It's becoming effectively the United States of Europe, as had been the intention there. And it's basically a love story between two people who are part of this, who on the day that the different countries become this federated state, that there's the proposal. And it's a romance love story. They're creating a better future. They're coming together as the countries of Europe are coming together as one. It's terribly, terribly sweet. I'm incredibly fond of it. But then I'm a sucker for that sort of tale. Gary Oswald, who does the blog on Sea Lion Press, which is basically the articles for that, he's written Delenda Est, which it's basically little snapshots of history of how one country in Africa develops differently to how it does, and how it becomes basically a better place, a beacon of hope for places around it. It's effectively a couple of paragraphs on 2,300 years ago, this event happens, and then it leads on, and you just follow how a different history, and you get this beacon of hope in Africa, which is rather nice. Sean Hazlett then wrote The Serpent's Wall, which you're probably better able than I am to.
No, I want to know. You're better at. I want to hear how you explain it, because you're much more eloquent than I am.
Right. Basically, this is actually set in Ukraine. It's looking at the difficulties faced in the Soviet era, where you have unpleasant Soviets. I think unpleasant would be a fair description. Dealing with put upon Ukrainian peasants. The mother of the central character has died, but had been protecting a secret in there. The daughter is now following on and is protecting that same secret. It's the Serpent's Wall is the secret, why they're staying put, and it becomes very much a matter of protecting this secret at all costs. Then the secret starts protecting back. It's a story of sacrifice and self-sacrifice for the greater good. Again, one doesn't want to give too much away, because the whole purpose of things is to find out. It's one of these tales which unfold and you say, oh yeah, right, yes, that makes sense. And it all comes together in a I'm going to embarrass you now, in a terribly way. You feel, I should have spotted that so many times throughout, because the clues are all there. It's that you read, oh right, yeah, I was told, and it's perfectly paced. It's a perfectly paced unfolding story, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I enjoyed all of them. So.
I couldn't have. I'm not very good at explaining my own story. I would have given it all away, and it would have been the way you described it was so much more poignant than. And the other thing that I didn't even conceive of is the self-sacrifice piece, which strangely is a common theme in my work. I don't know why. It just is. So, right. in fact, the other story I think I had, because I had sent two stories, but I think that was the one you chose. The other one has the same theme. It's more overt though, so I don't know what's going on with me subconsciously, but yeah, you're right. That now that I think about it, yeah, you're right. It's another Hazlett self-sacrifice story.
Yeah,
sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm making this.
No worries.
Right.
Yes. I then have a second piece in HCI. HCI was an acronym that was used in the First World War, which stands for Heavy Casualties Inevitable.
Oh, wow.
And it's simply a series of letters from people to loved ones the day before Passchendaele, Battle of Passchendaele in 1917. All the people are from the same village, a little village in Hampshire, which I know reasonably well. My sister lives not too far from it. All the letters are based on genuine letters that were sent, but they weren't sent at necessarily from the same time or place. I've taken the liberty of moving the letters and adapting them slightly, but the general theme, the general tenor of each letter are based on real letters that got sent home. And it's basically to try and put personality to casualty figures. I mean, obviously, Passchendaele happens the next day. Every person who writes a letter ends up on a name on a war memorial. But it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, 1,000 people were killed here," and it's it's just numbers, and it's very easy to lose track that each of those 1,000 represents a real life with real loved ones around, and there are real consequences to it. And
what was the Stalin quote? It was a single death is tragic, a million deaths is a statistic.
Yeah. Which, as unpleasant a person as Stalin was, is absolutely right. And you have to. It's very easy. Even now in Ukraine, you hear of casualties have been heavy, casualties have been medium, casualties have been light. But what does that actually mean? And in HCI, I try to convey each one of these. Try and convert the statistic into a number of tragedies, and the First World War is a great one for tragedies because there's often the sensation of it was also bloody futile. Sort of 20 years later, it all happened again, only more so. You had, in many countries, effectively an entire generation either wiped out or transformed forever.
Well, I mean, that's, not... on the Russian side in this current conflict, for instance, like if you look at the population pyramid of like Russian males, it's the trough essentially of that population, like it troughs, and in that trough, those that trough is getting to be more meaningful because those are the men and women who are fighting this conflict. Now, not to, Putin's one thing, like he chose this war, but there's also a ton of conscripts on the Russian side who are just being thrown into the meat grinder. So, many of whom have behaved abysmally in Bucha and other places, but still, you're having an entire generation on the Russian side that's destroyed. Now, I haven't looked at the population pyramid on the Ukrainian side, but it's probably somewhat similar.
Yeah, and of course on the Ukrainian side, not only have you got the problems associated with the those fighting, but also the civilians who in occupied territory in places like Bucha. I mean, how does anyone who survived Bucha have a normal life afterwards? It's that there, in terms of rebuilding Ukraine, it's not only going to be the infrastructure, but the amount of psychological support that's going to be necessary is just mind-boggling. Yes, that's so that there are many aspects to building a better future in there. That's what HCI is trying to do, trying to put a face to the numbers. There, B.D. Roberts wrote "The Stranger I Knew," a time travel story, a very personal one. Basically, a future self comes back and tells the person things to make their life so much easier, to save them so much heartache and problems, and making different. Basically, an older self coming back to impart the wisdom that they've gained from experiences, and it's a very personal, better future. These things are going to be good. There's a lot of interesting things coming about. Live your life the way you want to. But basically, just being able to advise yourself with the hindsight one has gathered, which is rather sweet. Alex Wallace writes the Lady of Guidance. Now, Alex is part Filipino and has relatives from the Philippines during the Japanese occupation there, and has some very harrowing stories of there. And this is effectively it's looking at that period. It's not avoiding it happening, but it's some people saving some from some of the people who from that tragedy there, and again, it doesn't resolve the problem. Most of the things that happened historically happen, but some people get saved because of the actions of the central character. Alex feels strongly about the Japanese occupation, about the various occupations of the Philippines, and again the situation with the Japanese occupation of the Philippines and the Russian occupation of the Ukrainian places that they have occupied. He can see a lot of similarities along there, and he draws that out. Sergio Palumbo, an Italian who writes The Notes of an Unknown Author, and basically it's someone comes across notes from an unknown author which guide him through some pieces of self-discovery. and it's as though an author is giving him advice. I hadn't realised, but in actual fact, there are strong similarities to the Stranger I Know, insofar as it's the being given advice and help. Now, it's an entirely different context and everything, but I hadn't appreciated that before. That's interesting piece of self-discovery there. Andy Cook writes Skyborn, which is the first portion of a novel. It's got airships, it's post-apocalypse, it's brilliant. Basically, the apocalypse has happened. In the first 8 chapters, which is what we see in Building a Better Future, we don't know how the apocalypse happened, but it happened. Humanity was badly destroyed. One set of survivors, airships and small modular reactors to keep it afloat. And basically, they're flying above the Earth, waiting for things to settle down there. He's actually finished writing the novel now. I'm proofing it, and it's going to be published basically as soon as I've published it in full through Sergeant Frosty Publications, my one there. But the first 8 chapters are in Building a Better Future. The full novel coming out soon, probably mid-October time. But proofing needs to be done, cover art needs to be approved, so timescales to be decided. But mid-October is my best guess. But yeah, it's Andy Cook who explains science brilliantly. How does an airship work? You've got it all. It's young adult adventure. The main protagonist is 13 there, and it's great. I enthuse about everything there. And the final piece from Siobhan Williams, The Survivor. It's basically the story of someone who survives the concentration camps during World War II. And it's the thought processes of survival and how he eventually, during World War II, he's eventually released when American soldiers come through. That aspect is very Band of Brothers-esque. In, I think it's the 9th episode, where the 101st discover one of the outlying concentration camps, and you get to see that heavily influences the depiction. The person is released by American soldiers, and he always regards the American soldiers that did this as angels who came to save him, because who other than angels would come into hell to release people from the devils. Eventually, towards the end of his life, the survivor goes across to America. He has a name, and he finds one of the people who rescued him, has a reunion with him and with his grandson, and it's basically the touching element. okay, there were angels with dirty faces, but in this time and this place, and whatever they are now, then this is what they were. And he buys a lottery ticket. Inevitably, he wins the prize because, that's the way these stories go. And amongst the people he thanks, the angels and everything, but he thanks the Nazi Party for this. And the presser, what? Why? Oh, well, they gave me the numbers. And then he shows his arm there, and effectively it's the showing despite everything, the indomitable spirit. Humour will always triumph one way or another. And it felt that was the right note to end the anthology on. Humour, regardless of what shit you go through, there is an end. You will come through, and there are better times ahead. And that's a very quick walk through the stories in the book.
On that note, better times ahead. What are you thinking about in a potential sequel anthology? Right.
There's been talk of a potential sequel, and the initial idea, and it's all set subject to change and everything, but it's the looking at 10 years after, okay, we are building a better future. This is what's happening. What is it like 10 years, 15 years, however long, but after the events, after great events and the reconstruction is underway, what is happening? There's one tale which is basically it's a soppy romance between two people who have lost loved ones during a great conflict, during the conflict, and it's a romance. They support each other through their loss. They come together, they grow closer together, and they have their happy ever after amidst this rebuilding. The premise behind this is simply that reconstruction of Ukraine, it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort. 10 years down the road, it's still going to be a thing that is ongoing. So, yeah, it is that's the initial premise. We haven't yet got to the stage of having a title or anything complicated like that. It's still in the should we do this? Part of the issue is it would be very nice to do it. From a purely cost-effective point of view, this isn't the best way of getting money to the appeal. It's more cost-effective just to get people to donate direct rather than buying. But it's a lot of fun writing these books.
Yeah. But there's also a personal element to it. People are putting their own love and
absolutely
and ideas into these stories for a greater purpose. So I totally agree on you. It's not the most efficient way to raise money, but in terms of kind of the overall consciousness and getting people to engage and understand what's really going on, it's more effective from from the emotional resonance of what you're trying to do. which is, I think, in some cases more important.
Yeah, and at its most fundamental, I can say, well, I donated X amount of pounds to a fund, and it has absolutely no meaning. I can pick up the book and say, I was the editor of this. It's actually real. It's substantial. It's something I can throw at the wall when I'm annoyed with what's happening on television. But it is something, and it is a creative thing, which, given that the nature of reconstruction is that it has to be creative, it's following that theme. But yeah, from a purely pragmatic point of view, if the objective is to get money to the appeal, yeah, there are better ways of doing it, but it's a lot of fun. And hopefully, in addition to the funds that it raises, it gives the people who buy and read it pleasure. What you show me a writer who doesn't want to give the readership pleasure, and I'll show you someone who's not a writer.
Right. Writers just want to be loved, right? Or read.
Or hated. I mean, sometimes they do it to get an emotion that way, but they're writing to create something, to create an emotional response. And of course, some of them, a few, I think it was Michael Moorcock once wrote in a dedication dedicated to my bank manager for constantly reminding me that I need to write more. Some people just do it for the money, but writers that are worthwhile, you can tell that they love what they're doing. As I've often said, if the writer doesn't love what they're writing, how can the reader love what's doing? The writer is putting their emotion into their work, and that's the emotion that the reader is getting out. You can play all the clever tricks with words and sentence structure and all the rest, but if there's no emotion there, it's just dull. It's dead. You've got to have a resonance with someone.
Now, how, in terms of getting the word out for the anthology, how have you been doing that? Have you had have you engaged with the Ukrainian government at all? Have you engaged with the British media?
It's all been terribly ad hoc at the moment. Contacted the British media. Haven't yet contacted the Ukrainian government, but I think it's mainly because just at the moment I think they've got more important things to do than they've got to deal with their current problem first. I guess I'm just too shy and retiring.
No, I mean, I would recommend just, I mean, you live in London, right?
Yeah.
Just stopping by the Ukrainian embassy and just say, hey, I'm trying to raise money for your cause through this mechanism. Here's a copy of the book. If there's anything you can do to help me help you raise funds, just let me know. You should also reach out to the various I don't know if The Economist would cover it, but you probably reach out to The Guardian, other various news outlets in the UK. It can't hurt. I mean, worst case they'll ignore you, but
yeah. Worst case outcome is I end up exactly where I am.
Right. I mean, you got nothing to lose.
I cannot lose. There's a lot to possibly gain. Absolutely, yes. I will have to do that. Thank you for the marketing advice.
Yeah, the ideas are easy. They're free. It's the execution that's hard. So, as you know, as a former Royal Marine, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. No. As soon as my son goes off to university and I've got the place to myself, I can take a trundle up to London and see the sights and the embassy and all the rest. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and just have them take a book with them to
Yeah.
university.
Yes. Donate a book to them. Yeah. Worst case, they can. Worst case is they toss it away and ignore the strange crank.
But I would bet you would get plenty of. I mean, has anybody else, to your knowledge, done something like this?
Not to my knowledge, and to be fair, whenever I've mentioned it to people, it's always been, "Wow, that's wonderful." There, so yeah, no, I really must make that effort.
All right. Well, anything else you want to impart to writers and editors out in the world about the anthology, or just writing and editing in general?
Right. Well, the first thing I would say is never, ever, ever try and produce an anthology start to finish in 17 days.
As an editor, I could have told you that I take as much time as I possibly can get away with.
I mean, I had a full head of hair back in. Yes. So the subsequent one, the sequel, is going to be on a much more relaxed schedule. When we've sorted out all the details of theme and what have you, we'll start to be contacting authors such as yourself, such as anyone listening to this. If they have brilliant ideas for 10 years on, I'm always happy to listen. Yeah, and again, having a publishing house myself, it's me. Okay, it's a small publishing house, but going through the process, I know how to get things to market. Getting them from market to people's pocket, that's another kettle of red herrings, but we've got there. But and it certainly makes a variation from what we normally produce, which is, as I say, historical fiction for children and young adults.
All right, my friend. It was a pleasure getting to know you for these 3 episodes and these chats.
Likewise.
I wish you great success, and continued success with Building a Better Future and its successor. And I look forward to many such chats in the future. Thank you again.
Many thanks indeed.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.